The file begins. 2024, the year the numbers turned to dust. The declaration of near bankruptcy wasn't a confession. It was a post-mortem audit performed on a living man. The loss of the Adidas partnership was the official time of death for the financial empire. $1 billion evaporated. Pause. In a single news cycle. The shockwave wasn't about the money but the speed, a testament to how quickly a digital god can be unplugged from the machine. The obituaries for his fortune were written on the stock market ticker. They were brutal, and they were public. His success always smelled of new leather and audacious ambition. Now the air was thick with the scent of foreclosure and stale champagne. This was the anatomy of the fall, executed with corporate precision. The world watched the demolition of an icon, mistaking the controlled implosion for a random act of madness. But this wasn't the verdict. It was merely the reading of the charges. The money was just the architecture. The real collapse happened inside. A fortress of ego, once besieged by adoring fans, became a bunker of one. This is the inventory of his isolation. He had spent 2 decades collecting allies like art, only to store them in a warehouse and forget they existed. His fatal flaw wasn't arrogance. It was a profound misunderstanding of human connection. He saw people as instruments, to be tuned for his symphony and then put away. A former collaborator, speaking from the shadow of a non-disclosure agreement, put it bluntly. The loyalty he demanded was absolute. Pause. The loyalty he gave was conditional. The silence from his peers was the loudest sound of 2024. No public defenses, no quiet words of support, just the cold, hard vacuum left by burned bridges. He had once stood on stages before 100,000 souls. Now he was a king, ruling over an empire of empty rooms and echoing hallways. Aniskalechная судьба, authored by his own hand. But every tragedy has a dazzling first act, a Genesis story written in grit and sound waves. Before the isolation, there was a hunger so pure it could burn through studio glass. His ambition smelled of hot vinyl and cold rejection. He wasn't just a producer from Chicago. He was an architect drawing blueprints for a city no one else could see, building beats that were less like songs and more like arguments for his own existence. The industry saw a beatmaker. He saw a throne, empty and waiting. This was the anatomy of his ascent. The relentless self-belief was the fuel. Pause, and the accelerant for the eventual fire. He didn't just knock on the door of the establishment, he took a sledgehammer to the lock, his jaw wired shut, but his vision wide open. That first album wasn't a debut, it was a verdict. Music was the key. Fashion became the kingdom. The raw sound he had perfected was now the soundtrack for a global takeover. This was the era of the invincible empire, built not of brick and mortar, but of hype, leather, and neoprene. He didn't just sell sneakers, he sold a brutalist worldview, an aesthetic of beautiful austerity that turned millions into disciples. The lines for his products looked like pilgrimages. The shows were not catwalks. They were performance art, armies of models standing in silent testament to his singular vision. He had achieved a new form of power, a cultural gravity so immense it bent the industry to his will. He was no longer just a musician, he was a system, a tastemaker whose decrees were followed with the fervor of scripture. He built this empire on his own terms. Pause. The fatal clause in that contract was that he would also be the one to sign its demolition order. The demolition began not with a bang, but with the rustle of subpoenas. The same brands that had once clamored for his signature now sent legal couriers. The anatomy of this fall wasn't in the public rants. It was in the fine print of contracts he'd breached. A German textile manufacturer alleging millions in unpaid invoices for custom neoprene. A Japanese dye house suing for intellectual property theft over a specific shade of desert sand. These were not grand battles. They were a death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one drawing blood from the corporate body. Pause. We have reviewed the court filings. Document 30A from the Los Angeles Superior Court case, Gap Incorporated versus Ye, details a willful and malicious disregard for contractual obligations. The language is cold, the numbers colder. They wanted their advances back, plus damages. The total was a figure that would cripple a lesser entity. For Ye, it was just the Tuesday filing. His empire, once a fortress of concrete and hype, was being besieged by process servers. The legal machinery he had once used to protect his kingdom was now being turned against it, grinding slowly, inexorably. And every new lawsuit was another nail. The public saw the lawsuits. The public did not see the ledger. A copy of his private financial records from this period, leaked by a disillusioned accountant, is not a business document. It is a testament. A digital tombstone engraved with catastrophic expenditures. Millions wired to obscure architectural firms for a self-sustaining bunker city in Wyoming that never broke ground. 7-figure retainers for ideological consultants and cultural futurists. One line item simply read, "The water." Pause. $42 million. No further explanation. This wasn't mismanagement. It was a form of ritual sacrifice, burning currency to appease the ghosts of his own ambition. An insider, speaking from a secure line, described meetings where financial projections were dismissed as a failure of imagination. He wasn't building a business. He was trying to brute force a reality into existence with cash. He treated his treasury like an infinite resource, a divine gift. But the audit revealed the truth. The empire was hollow. The gold plating was flaking off, revealing the cheap metal of debt and delusion beneath. And this delusion was a contagion. It infected his relationships, turning allies into obstacles and partners into disposable assets. The anatomy of this particular fall wasn't a sudden cataclysm. It was a slow, deliberate demolition. He didn't just burn bridges. He dismantled them bolt by bolt and sold the scrap metal to his enemies. Each tweet was a charge of dynamite. Each rant a lit fuse. The fallout was biblical. Brand partnerships, once the bedrock of his financial empire, dissolved like sugar in acid rain. Shopify didn't just remove a product, they performed a digital exorcism, cleansing their platform of his presence. Pause. Governments began to treat him not as an artist, but as a biohazard. A cancelled Australian visa was not a bureaucratic formality. It was a declaration of quarantine. He had become a pariah state of one, surrounded by a self-made wall of scorched earth and broken handshakes. The post-mortem audit of his tangible assets reads like the inventory of a failed state. The empire was not just hollow, it was being repossessed. The Calabasas compound, once a fortress of creative chaos, now bore the quiet, indelible stain of a federal tax lien. Pause. $7.3 million. A concrete number in a world of abstract rants. Then came the whispers from Wyoming, where his sprawling monster of a ranch sat not as a monument to vision, but as collateral. Property records buried in county clerk databases showed titles being transferred, not sold. These were not business deals. They were capitulations. While he staged surprise performances in Mexico City, the machinery of debt collection ground on, silent and efficient. He projected an image of recovery, a new baseline. But the numbers told a different story. The story of a man trying to outrun a financial avalanche on a pair of broken skis, with the shadow of the taxman stretching longer than any private jets. The bleeding had to be stopped, so he took out a full-page ad, not in a music magazine, but in the Wall Street Journal, the holy scripture of the very people he had alienated. This was not a confession. It was a prospectus for a hostile takeover of his own ruined narrative. The anatomy of the apology was cold, corporate, and meticulously crafted. He offered up his own damaged brain as the sacrificial lamb. The 2002 car crash, the bipolar 1 diagnosis, and the final, desperate shield, a formal diagnosis of autism, conveniently suggested by his wife. These weren't reasons. They were legal instruments, a new vocabulary to rebrand the madness as a manageable condition. He spoke of a 4-month manic episode, a period of psychotic, paranoid, and impulsive behavior, a neat box for the swastikas and the anti-Semitic screeds. He promised accountability and a new baseline. But the words felt hollow, like a press release for a product recall. The silence from his former acolytes was the loudest sound in the room. This was the launch of a new collection, perhaps his last. Pause. The main product was forgiveness. And so the post-mortem audit concludes. The final inventory of sins reveals a unique kind of spiritual destitution, a poverty born not of scarcity, but of infinite excess. He built an empire of staggering influence, only to find himself exiled within its walls. The fatal mistake was not ambition. It was the belief that he could become the god of his own creation, immune to the gravitational pull of consequence. His legacy is no longer a monument. It is the wreckage of an empire, a collection of brilliant, fractured artifacts that will forever be sold with a disclaimer. The upcoming album, The Concert in Italy. They are not a resurrection. They are the echoes in a mausoleum he built for himself. He chased a vision so far into the wilderness that he lost the path back. The tragedy is not that he fell. The tragedy is that he reached the summit and discovered nothing was there but a reflection of his own solitude. The final verdict is not written in headlines or sales figures. Pause. It is written in the silence that follows when the music stops.